Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. I am going to own up to being pretty nervous about making this video. It's one that I've been thinking about doing for years, but every time I've sat down to start work on it, I have essentially bottled it. The plan today is to explore what's often described as the origins of the two-party political system in Britain, which of course today does have more than two parties. Why this makes me anxious is that a video on the Whigs and Tories, one that simply explains their differences, albeit in a fairly reductive way, could last about a minute and a half and no more. But on the other hand, a video that sought to ensure that every base was covered, that tried to unpick and explore every minuscule complexity, could take us a day and a half. Granted, that last measurement might be slightly hyperbolic, but either way, you get my point. Ideally, this video is going to approach a happy medium position. I mean, that's the plan anyway. So, let's take a look at the Whigs, the Tories, and the changing way that politics got done. If we hop over to the Oxford English Dictionary online, again, because that's what I did in the last video too, I just want to point out I'm not sponsored by the OED, although if you are listening OED, I would be very happy for you to sponsor my channel. Let's hop over there now and do a side-by-side comparison of the nouns Whig and Tory. When we do this, we can see that in both cases, the second entry for each term indicates that at least in some instances, these terms are antonyms of each other. Whig, quote, a person who supported the exclusion of James, Duke of York, later James II, from the succession to the thrones of England, Scotland and Ireland on account of his Roman Catholicism during the late 1670s and 1680s, opposed to Tory. And Tory, quote, a person who opposed the exclusion of James, Duke of York, later James II, from the succession to the thrones of England, Scotland and Ireland on account of his Roman Catholicism during the late 1670s and 1680s. And wouldn't you know, that term is in opposition, opposed to, Whig. We can also see that the earliest extant use for both of these terms can be found in 1678, in the excellent ballad of Tom Tory and Tony Whig, which, as we see from this copy, held by the Huntington, is a single sheet of lyrics that's intended to be sung to the tune of the interestingly named Shittle Cum Shite. In 1678, the restored Stuart monarchy was working to face down the so-called Exclusion Crisis, which spanned the years 1679 to 1681. King Charles II's brother and heir presumptive, James, Duke of York, had been slowly, but increasingly overtly, converting to the Roman Catholic faith. In 1672, he had ceased to receive communion in the Church of England, although he did still attend services. In the next year, 1673, his conversion ensured that he was going to find himself on the wrong side of the new Test Act. This act prevented those who were religiously non-conforming from holding various offices. In James's case, this would require him to resign from the role of Lord High Admiral. 1673 was also the year that James remarried. His new Roman Catholic bride was Mary of Modena. The Pope would subsequently recognise both James's conversion and his second marriage in 1676. While James's brother Charles II was helping to fill the nurseries of his many mistresses with numerous illegitimate royal babies, this king and his wife, Catherine of Braganza, were unable to repeat the pattern in their own household, and thus, as time marched on, it seemed increasingly likely that King Charles II would be followed as king, and also as supreme governor of the Protestant Church of England, by his Roman Catholic brother. James would be the first unequivocal Roman Catholic to occupy these two roles since the reign of Mary I. The so-called Popish plot of 1678, which reportedly sought to assassinate Charles so that his brother James might ascend to the throne all the sooner, only exacerbated the sense of discontent and division. James's biographer, W.A. Speck, explains how, quote, prospects of the apparent imminent accession of a Catholic to the throne led members of both Houses of Parliament to try to prevent his succession to the crown. Abortive attempts to pass a bill to that effect were made in 3 successive parliaments between 1679 and 1681, giving rise to the Exclusion Crisis. The King's decision to stop calling Parliament and to seemingly seek retribution against those who were attempting to divert the succession away from his brother also caused, understandable I think, consternation. In addition to seeking to block a Roman Catholic successor, there were also those who now wanted to ensure that the monarchy would not revert to having absolute power. James was encouraged, unsuccessfully, to renounce his faith. Nevertheless, he would succeed his brother on the 6th of February 1685. Then, in 1688, James's wife Mary of Modena gave birth to a son. Due to the by then established tradition of male preference primogeniture, this meant that James's older Protestant daughters from his first marriage were no longer next in line to the throne. They had now been replaced by their infant Catholic half-brother. Within months, James's elder daughter Mary and her cousin husband Willem had deposed James and taken up his throne. I've made a video on this so-called Glorious Revolution, which I will leave linked. While the attempt to remove James from the succession had been part of the Whig agenda, it should not be forgotten that some Tories would ultimately support his removal. This happened when their belief in the correctness of the continuation of the Stuart succession through the line designated by male preference primogeniture lost out to their desire to preserve the Church of England. And so, James, his wife and son went into exile on the continent. That son then went on to marry and have his own children. Thus, for more than a century, there were individuals alive who might seek to make good their claim to the throne, over the claim of William and Mary, of her sister Anne, and ultimately of their later Hanoverian cousins. These rival claimants and their supporters were known as the Jacobites, and I have made a video on them that I will also be leaving linked. Although the original cause of the political division between Whig and Tory, and in some cases between Whig and Tory was still very much an issue, the meaning of these terms evolved. If we look back to the OED, we see here that in the 1690s the terms merged into the following senses. Whig, quote, a member, supporter or representative of the political party which constituted one of the 2 principal political factions or identities in Britain and its colonies from the years after the Glorious Revolution, 1688, to the mid-19th century, being the dominant political party for most of the 18th century and eventually being succeeded by the Liberal Party in the 1860s, an adherent of the principles, policies, etc. associated with this party. In the late 19th century, sometimes in dated use, a supporter of the Liberal Party, especially one advocating a more conservative form of liberalism, opposed to Tory. And we are also reminded of it, quote, originally developing from the political faction which had attempted to exclude James, Duke of York, from the succession to the thrones of England, Scotland and Ireland. The Whigs were always associated with the principles of constitutional government, limitation of the executive power of the Crown, and the Protestant succession to the throne. Additionally, the Whigs were typically viewed as the party of commerce, free trade and economic expansion. In the later 18th and early 19th centuries, the influence of the radical movement, the Whig radical, and the challenge of a renewed Tory party saw the Whigs becoming increasingly associated with progressive ideas such as parliamentary reform, Catholic emancipation, and colonial self-government. And as for the Tories, we see a very similar entry once again. It's essentially word for word the same as we have in the Whig entry, so beginning, quote, a member, supporter or representative of the political party, and so on. As you can see, they are side by side and the wording is almost identical. until we get to this part. Of course, they are not succeeded by the Liberals. Instead, they are succeeded by the, quote, Conservative Party in the 1830s. Here is where it differs. Quote, in later use, an informal name for a member, supporter or representative of the British or Canadian Conservative Party. As with the Whig entry, we are given a reminder of the origins of this movement in the Exclusion Crisis. And here we see that still, Whig and Tory are antonyms of each other. The Tories were typically supporters of the executive power of the Crown and the authority of other established institutions, for example, the episcopacy of the Church of England. The decision of some Tories to become Jacobites at both the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and the Hanoverian Succession of 1714 led to the exclusion of Tories from senior civil, ecclesiastical or military office until the end of the 18th century. As we see, this period is connected to another term, namely the Whig supremacy. Quote, by this time, a new Tory party, developing in large part from the Pittite faction of the Whigs, had shed the association with Jacobitism and became more generally a party supporting the established order in church and state. For example, in opposing the extension of the franchise. As my intention is to explore the origins of the Whigs and Tories, through these definitions we are now beginning to travel further forward in time than I wish to do in this video. And so to counteract it maybe, I think it's important for us to hop backwards in time. Not just for that reason, but because I do also want to flag up that both of these terms, Whig and Tory, existed before the period that was marked by the Exclusion Crisis, albeit not by that long. At least, that's how it appears when we look at the earliest extant recorded uses. The term Tory is slightly older than Whig. It dates to 1646 and was used, as we see, in 17th century Ireland to refer to, quote, a person living as an outlaw after being dispossessed by English settlers and surviving by acts of robbery and plunder against the English. Later, any Irish Catholic or Royalist who has taken up arms against the English government. While Whig seemingly dates to 1657 and is, we are told, quote, Scottish, a nickname for an adherent or supporter of the National Covenant of 1638, a Covenanter. More generally, an adherent of the Presbyterian cause in Scotland, especially in the 17th century. Later also a strict or extreme Presbyterian. The term Whig connects to, and we are told originates out of, Whigamore, which was, quote, originally a Covenanter from the west of Scotland, especially one who participated in the 1648 raid on Edinburgh. Later, more generally, disparaging. Any Covenanter, a Scottish Presbyterian, especially of the 17th and 18th centuries. And as we see, it connects to Whig. As we can see, in both cases, these terms have original meanings that, at least in part, may be viewed as disparaging or pejorative. Was there, an implicit sense of accusation in them, and subsequently maybe a desire to defend that endures as the meaning of these terms develop? Might this be somewhat foundational to the seemingly inescapably combative business of party politics that endures through to today? Certainly, the relationship between these factions and the last Stuart monarchs was a complex and occasionally contradictory one. On the one hand, of course, the Whigs were the main voices who had called for William, Mary, and the Glorious Revolution, which in turn meant, I think, that they were perhaps the logical group for these new monarchs and those that followed them to feel the most safe with. There were, though, also those among their number who saw absolute monarchy as a terrible danger, one to be avoided at all costs. So much so that they may feel they were seeing absolute monarchy where it did not, in fact, exist. They had been the ones to invite William and Mary to invade, essentially, and rule. But they had also imposed contractual responsibilities upon them before acknowledging them as their king and queen. Having moved against James, both as heir presumptive and as king, could any royal really trust their loyalty? Might it be that even the smallest, perhaps perceived infraction could lead them to go in search of alternative candidates for the crown. Might they even try the experiment of having a republic of some form again? The Tories, on the other hand, had broadly speaking supported the Church of England, the power and authority of the monarch, and the traditions, the customary inheritance of the crown by blood and male preference primogeniture. Now, of course, that may have meant that a few in that group saw William and Mary and those that followed them as having less right to the throne than the Catholic Jacobite Stuarts they had supplanted, which in turn makes them a logical focus of distrust. However, perhaps this distrust might have been overwritten somewhat by a recognition of their devotion to tradition, to pomp and circumstance, to the authority of kings, to the Church of England, to the way things used to be done. Either way, complicating everything further still is that, like modern political parties, people may affiliate with one side for a single or indeed for myriad reasons or policies. Attempting to determine one person's loyalty or otherwise based upon their party alone was not necessarily the most accurate means of determination. Political parties and their doctrines are also not literally or figuratively frozen, as if preserved in aspic. They shift, both as a group and as individuals. So, for example, while people who sided with the Whigs during the Exclusion Crisis had previously opposed King Charles I in Parliament, that should not be read as the Whigs being the same as the parliamentarians or the Roundheads. Similarly, while the modern Conservative Party of the UK is known as the Tory party, that should not be read as evidence of a continuation of party or policies from then to now, because instead, a succession of parties bearing that name, Tory or Conservative, or the nickname Tory, have been founded, dissolved, and founded again. Political parties and the ways they interacted with the monarch were also very different. There would, for example, not be a Prime Minister until at least the reign of King George I. Robert Walpole was a Whig who is viewed by many as the first person to occupy that role of Prime Minister. Both before and after this point, Whigs and Tories vied for the majority control in Parliament, but they also vied for influence at court. Because members of these political groups were not simply the monarch's governmental advisors. Many of them were also their companions and confidants. And increasingly, this occurred not simply when these individuals were ruling, but beforehand, when they were the heirs apparent or presumptive waiting in the wings. This in turn led to a situation where monarchs and heirs who found themselves at odds, in dispute with each other, whether that's William and Mary fighting Anne about finances, or the various battles that raged between the Hanoverian fathers and sons, all resulted in the heirs discovering that they could affiliate themselves with whichever party their detested family member and monarch was not most aligned with. And so, rival royal courts blossomed as monarchs in waiting caroused with members of Parliament who eagerly expected to enjoy more influence in the reign to come. Charles Littleton, writing for the History of Parliament, offers insight into how this worked during the reign of Queen Anne, which he states, quote, stands at a crucial period, when the party system, which is familiar today, and which determines the composition of governments, was in its earlier stages. When it came to the Whigs and Tories, though, quote, Queen Anne had to pay attention to them and to their leaders. The parties were not unified blocs, though, and Godolphin and Harley were not their leaders. It was to her Lord Treasurer Godolphin that the Queen looked in 1705 to keep me out of the power of the merciless men of both parties. The extremists in both parties, the merciless men of the Whig junto or the High Church Tories, harassed Anne in her attempts to rule. She valued Godolphin and Harley as both espoused the ideal of moderation and acted as leaders of what was effectively a third group, the Queen's own ministers, the court party. Anne was still operating under the system of personal monarchy. She was, after all, the last British monarch to exercise the royal veto over legislation, and she was the head of government, which she conducted through the advice of her most trusted personal ministers, Godolphin, Marlborough, and Harley. She valued them because she assumed their loyalty was to her above all. not to a party. During her reign, though, this ideal of her ministers steering a middle way between the parties often ran up against the realities of their increasing organisation, numbers in Parliament, and ideological fervour. She held on tenaciously to her prerogative right to choose her own officials. Politics was, and arguably still is, personal. A sign of both how little and how much changes over time can, I think, be found in a crisis that involved a queen and her government more than a century after Queen Anne's death. 2 years into the reign of Queen Victoria, her personal friend, mentor, and political favourite, the Whig Prime Minister Lord Melbourne, was left with little choice but to resign for lack of support in the House. His rival, the Tory-turned-Conservative Robert Peel, was who the Queen was advised to ask to form the next government. Peel's would have been a minority government, though, and perhaps that led him to want to alter the composition of the Queen's personal household. He wanted to replace some of her Whig-connected ladies with those linked to Tories. Queen Victoria found this idea intolerable. To her, this was an interference with her private life and her very real affections. While Anne had, quote, held on tenaciously to her prerogative right to choose her own officials, Victoria wanted to do likewise in a more domestic setting, with her household companions, and so she refused. Peel would also not back down, and so Melbourne's resignation was overturned, and he remained Victoria's Prime Minister, despite the consternation of those who saw the Queen's behaviour as being profoundly unconstitutional. Just 2 years later, Peel and his party would win a majority in the 1841 election. Marlborough resigned again, for real this time. And Victoria agreed to a reconfiguring of her household. This is a move that some credit to the influence of her new husband, Prince Albert. Queen Victoria would still be on the throne as the Whig Party formed a coalition with the so-called Peelites in 1859. They would officially become the Liberal Party in 1868, and thus the Whigs were no more in the United Kingdom, until that was 2014, when Walid Ghani ran for election as the leader of a Whig revival party. He received 103 votes. His 3 fellow candidates received 203, 169 and 86 votes respectively. The party website is now inactive, but according to an article on Quartz, this Whig revival party ran with, quote, no actual policies. Instead, the modern Whigs will stress values such as human rights, love of country and diversity, which they puzzlingly describe using the Swedish word for it, mångfald. Speaking to The Independent, Ghani was quoted as saying, we're clearly not about forming a government or even winning seats, but about raising the standard of political discourse. My goodness, wouldn't that be nice? So what do you think of the Whigs and the Tories? Was this exploration of the formation of these factions turned parties helpful to you? Do you think that monarchs like Queen Anne had a valid point, a reason to be concerned about the danger of party politics? That it could result in politicians putting their loyalty to party above everything else? And what are your thoughts on Ghani's Whig revival? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comments section underneath this video. I'd also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement, get the video shared, and hopefully help us to grow our community. I'm thinking we choose something political emoji-wise, and also could you put a word-based explanation as to why you've picked that emoji? Because apparently the algorithm pixies like words in your comments too. That does help with the old algorithm boosting. You can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to the place you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. If you like the channel, let some pals know about it. If you like this video in particular, please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, now is a great time to check to make sure you're not mysteriously unsubscribed against your will. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear. And that way YouTube plain they'll tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I'm next going live, which I do once a month currently to talk about the history news. Lots of you lovely viewers send me in news items. I select them, I put them up in a slideshow, and we sit down for, let's be honest, 2.5 hours to have a chat about them. It's a good time. You're not going to want to miss it. There is, of course, our failsafe. Head over to my website. I will link it. It is www.katrinamarchant.com. Head to the contact page and put your email address in this box and then click sign up. That will add you to my list, which will allow me to send you out a message once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to send you useful links for my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.